we still have time for Q&A. Any quick questions? All right. Okay. For Lucy and John, right?
I have two questions on two teachers here. First one is about the homelessness issue. I'm quite surprised that the governments like UK have new methods to tackle the homelessness issue to prevent people from being homeless. Yeah. So I wonder if that kind of techniques can be applied to Hong Kong according to your knowledge and your insights. And the second thing is about I feel uncomfortable is that it somehow it amounts to profiling, or do you follow very much in detail about one's data about how the rent paying punctuality? I think the issue of paying rent on time is a predictor of being at risk of homelessness. Is a kind of something ethical issues in it. Yeah. The second thing is about the social linguistics data. So it's a fascinating, very yeah. And then I have one projection about, as we all know that there are a lot of mainland talents coming to Hong Kong. So I wonder if there are any research insights about the map in future, for example, next census. So I wonder if you have any interesting or meaningful questions on mapping or to exploring what the talents impacts on Hong Kong in terms of the language standard or some kind of the social characteristics that you can think of, you can share with us in the first place.
If I can just answer that quickly, I think certainly there will be challenges and some constraints if we apply the case of the UK to Hong Kong. So for example, how to get access to data regarding those people's paying bills or whether they are missing certain payments. So I'm not quite sure about the details here, but in terms of the UK's case study, there have been efforts to put together some of the disconnected data they used to get access to. So prior efforts have not been focused on how to collect this data in a very organized manner so that they can detect those people who are at risk of losing their homes. So I think we are operating on quite different systems here, and then certainly there are some constraints related to Hong Kong in terms of access to these people's data and also how to organize them so that they give a very informed picture to predict what is going to happen next. Certainly this is something that we can further look into, maybe in terms of public policy research, and over to John and Lucy.
Sure. I mean, I think the homelessness issue in Hong Kong is quite different, right? But I think Social Welfare Department actually does have quite a lot of data they could use. I don't know how far they have gone in terms of trying to predict homelessness. But I think the real issue to me about homelessness that's a challenge is it's basically about mental health in many cases. And I think it's fair to say that mental health is one of Hong Kong's weaknesses. So when I was working for the government, I was an honorary justice of the peace. And of all the visits, so when you're a justice of the peace, you go to visit all the hospitals and all the prisons. And the only thing, most of the prisons, frankly, I was very impressed by, and the hospitals are generally very impressed. The only one I wasn't happy with was the Bacon-Shone hospital, which is the hospital for the mentally ill. And in fact, what shocked me is the conditions there were far worse than the prison that deals with mentally ill people. So frankly, if you're mentally ill, you're better off being in prison than being in hospital. Now, it's improved since then, but it's still very bad. And I think homelessness in Hong Kong, I believe, has a lot to do with mental health. So that's a different issue, and one of Hong Kong's weaknesses is that the healthcare and the social care systems are very distinct. They do not work well together. So anyway, we'd have another discussion. Now, the issue of the mainlanders in Hong Kong. So purely from a language perspective, the interesting thing in Hong Kong is that, frankly, most young people can speak Putonghua now. So, actually, from a language perspective, you don't really see mainlanders showing up. So if I showed you the Putonghua map, it's almost as boring as the Cantonese one, because it's very even across the whole of Hong Kong. There's not much there. It's much more interesting for other Chinese dialects, interestingly. So for example, Hakka is basically all in Northern New Territory. And there's a lot of Hakka speakers there still. Or the one that interests me even more is Fukien. So I found a paper written in the 1970s saying that there was an area of Eastern District that has lots of Fukien speakers. And the fascinating thing is that community still exists today. So usually you expect dialects to disappear over time. But that community has obviously continued to be reinforced as people have come to Hong Kong from Fukien. They all go and live in Eastern District, in a specific part of Eastern District. So that shows that even though the mainland itself has become much more evenly a Putonghua speaking place, Hong Kong still has dialects showing up in certain areas. So I think that to me is really very interesting. But I mean, the government doesn't frankly care about Chinese dialects other than Cantonese and Putonghua. But I think as policymakers, we should be interested because those are very important communities who are still important to Hong Kong. And I think, again, Hakka speakers still, lots of Hakka speakers still in Northern District.
Well, I want to add several things. One is, as far as the usage of data from the Census and Statistics Department or the Lands Department, they are the data producers and they are keen to have the data being used. In fact, I think they are probably the rich census data set is underutilized, and there should be more usage out of it. You know, if John or others have a certain specific issues, then go to the Census and Statistics Department and you can request this kind of customized calculations. So I think, but in Hong Kong, what is not so rarely is in other departments, they are like a social welfare department, they are the users of publicly collected statistics. And like in our social welfare case, a lot of the social welfare work is delegated to the NGOs who run the services. And then these NGOs own the data. They don't have to give it back to the government. All the individual cases rest with the NGOs, and they only have to give summary reports. So it's difficult. You know, the NGO knows who are those who might have might be vulnerable for being turned into homeless. However, because the government had this system of like some kind of outsourcing to different NGOs, they are spread out with different NGOs, and there's no centralized database. And I think that like this kind of declaration database, the government should, like in public transport companies, you know, this is regulated and submitted to the government. The data says the original database should be, while they're collected by the NGO, so it should be sent back shared, and at least the government should have the authority to look and collect and centralize those databases.
I couldn't agree more with Lucy. I think the social welfare NGO issue, I can accept is more challenging because it's very sensitive personal data. But I don't think that's a good reason why it's not shared back with the government. And I think that should have been addressed a long time ago. So I think, yeah, I think that's a really important issue. So the issue about the government's indirect responsibility. So I mentioned earlier about the Law Reform Commission reports. So the reason I feel very strongly about that is that the government records, the official records law in there's an issue about public body. So what is a public body in Hong Kong? right? So that according to the proposal that the Law Reform Commission put out, public body would still be a very narrow definition, essentially the government itself. But that to me is ludicrous. I mean, this university is a public body. It gets nearly all of its money from the government. And these NGOs may get most of their money from the government. So there should be an obligation that their data is either open or should be shared back to the government. So I think that's a really important issue. So assuming that those Law Reform Commission reports do indeed come out at some point, I hope that all of you will try and advocate to say that a public body needs to be a much broader definition. And again, the Transport Department one was already mentioned because I think that's a great example of how regulation can lead to change in behavior. It's an incentive at the organizational level. You basically say, if you want to be a public transport company, you have to agree that you share your data back with the government. And again, if you want to be an NGO taking money from social welfare department, you need to share that data back so that the government can identify who is at risk. It is somewhat crazy that that's not happening. It should happen.